All right, good evening, dear friends. We are here for our Creating a Food Forest monthly Zoom with Heal the Planet. My name is Megan. I'm Zooming you all from South Florida here in my living room. And I'm really excited about this Food Forest series that we've been doing. I'm really grateful for you guys being here tonight. If you'd like to write in the chat, if you were here last time, we're doing a 3-part series on food forests. Also, as we get started, to make sure that your mic is muted. Not that I don't want to hear you, but sometimes that background noise comes in because it's around dinner time, and we're able to communicate through the chat feature. So let's see. Millie's in Fort Lauderdale. Awesome. Looking to also build a rain catching system. Great. So yeah, if anyone else wants to chime in where they're coming in from on the chat, we'd love to hear it. But tonight we're going to talk about food forests. So if you weren't here last month, we're going to do a little review on what exactly a food forest is. I have a feeling you probably already know or have an idea of it if you're joining us here on the Zoom this evening, but we'll just kind of touch those bases again, and then we'll go into the details of how we actually create a food forest system. One of the things I love most about permaculture is that it's very translatable no matter where you are. I see we have someone joining us from Ontario, and so that's a very different bioregion than our place here in the tropics, but a lot of the skills that you'll learn here tonight will be translatable to anywhere you are. One of my favorite permaculture teachers, his name is Jeff Lawton. I'll write his name in the chat for you guys. He's a great resource. He has an abundance of videos on YouTube all around permaculture and starting food forests, and he does them in the craziest places. He's done them in Death Valley, where he has a project called Greening the Desert. You can use these principles anywhere. So wherever you are, I'm really excited for you being here tonight and excited to share a little bit about food forests and how wonderful they are and what gifts they can bring to your life. So before I open up the little slideshow that we're going to see tonight, I should introduce myself. I'm Megan, and I did not grow up in a food forest. I definitely did not have much awareness of the living world growing up. So I say this to say that if I can do this stuff, if I can teach a Zoom workshop on food forests, then you all can do this stuff too, no matter where you are, no matter what resources you have. One of the things I love most about permaculture is we're using what we have around us. So it's very accessible. We don't need a lot of money. We don't really need to use a lot of energy. Instead, we're maximizing what it is that we have around us to create the greatest yield. So yes, thank you all for being here tonight. Let's dive in. I'm going to share my screen. All right, who can see my screen? I see Richie, I see Nancy. Richie, you see it? You give me a thumbs up. Can you see my, yeah. Thanks, man. Whoever's those top 3 at the top, you guys are the ones who tell me if I'm just talking to myself or if the things are actually happening. So great, I'm glad it's up. Let's start the show. So creating a food forest. What is a food forest? Let's dive in. So a food forest is essentially growing food in a way that we don't usually think about growing food. So a lot of times when we think of growing food based around traditional agriculture and the themes that our generation, the last several generations, has really witnessed for growing food, it has been straight lines, rows, not forest-like in any way. So why would we want to grow in this way? We're going to explore some of those concepts tonight. But essentially what we're doing is we're simulating the ways that a forest grows to grow food. So there's a lot of benefits when we do this. We can maximize space. We'll dive into that in the next slide, but what we're seeing right here are the different layers that we can use when we are creating a food forest. So right now I am looking out at my front yard food forest. I'm facing towards the north, and um, my front yard is very small. It's the same size as most front yards. I live in a very suburban environment, and every year I do a little, I've lived here for 3 years now. This is my third spring in this house. And every year I do a little walk around to see how many useful plants I have on site, edible, medicinal. Um, and I just did that last weekend. I usually do it in May. And I had 185 edible and medicinal plants in just this tiny little space that I've got right here. If you guys want to explore my food forest a little bit more, I would walk around right now, but as we know, it would be quite chaotic for a Zoom call. So on my website, I have a food forest garden tour where it's all fancy and edited, and you can see all the different stuff that makes up my little front yard food forest. So I will post that at the end of this evening. But what we're trying to do is grow in this way where we're using all these different layers from our overarching canopy. My canopy layer that was already in place was some large live oak trees. So I have some beautiful live oaks over my home that cast a lot of shade, but really I see them as a benefit as well too, because they also provide a lot of fertility and life. Um, then I've grown some other larger trees. I've only been here for 3 years, so not things are not too tall yet. I have a moringa that's very tall, and I'm looking at that's about 25 feet. Um, but some of the other trees that could get very tall are not too tall yet. So one of the great things about food forests is we're able to fit a lot of stuff into a small space to maximize that space through stacking. And from that canopy layer, we move down all the way to our soil surface. So we have all these layers from our lower tree layer, which could be like our bananas and papayas here in the tropics, down to the shrub layer, which would be like Barbados cherry, elderberry. A lot of our cherries right now are fruiting in our place. Herbaceous is kind of that lower layer. I see comfrey on here. Rhizosphere, so those are root crops. I was just looking at some cassava that I just harvested the other day. That would be our sweet potatoes, things that grow below ground, and then things right at that soil surface as well too. And then we also have climbers too. When I was just out in my garden harvesting my props for this evening, I noticed a jasmine vine. I've always had a jasmine vine outside of my every house I've ever lived in. This one I didn't plant, but it was winding up this fire bush. And those climbers can also maximize that space too, because they're even using that trunk of the tree or of the trellis that I'm looking at right now as well too. So one of the things we want to keep in mind when we're creating a food forest is succession. So this is what happens to get a forest started. Just this afternoon, I was reading a book called The Hidden Life of Trees, and it's a wonderful book where I'm learning so much about the intelligence of trees and the interconnection of trees and like how forest really begins. And it starts really with these pioneer plants. So think about like a desolate, a lot of times someone in the chat, I think it was Millie was saying that she has a blank slate, or maybe it was Nancy, a blank slate to get started with. And sometimes we're like, where do I begin from that? When I moved in, I had I had all grass lawn in front of where I just showed you all. So one of the things first want to start doing is implementing those pioneer plants and starting to build soil. So starting from our foundation. And a lot of time those pioneer plants are already there trying to help us out. And the pioneer plants kind of get a bad rep. They're oftentimes known as weeds. One of our primary pioneer plants here in our place is Biden's alba, or Spanish needle, which is an amazing plant that is just so productive. And also really amazing antibacterial, antiviral. It's a bronchodilator that helps to open up the lungs, which is really useful at this time with the respiratory issues that are moving through the human species. But a lot of people don't like it. It's a very aggressive plant. But what this plant is doing, it's amazing. When you pull up a clump of this weed, you can see that it's building soil underneath. So it'll pop up through sidewalk cracks, anywhere it can get started, and it starts to build just a little bit of life. And then those leaves fall down. It starts to accumulate biomass moving through on windy, breezy days like today, and starts to build soil. And from there, that's where life begins. That's where the forest can start. So then we start getting our perennial plants and grasses, and you can see how it moves through that process of all the way up to the canopy, the climax forest. One second, I messed it up. Okay, so why food forests? I would love to hear in the chat why you think food forests, because these are just a couple of my reasons why, but just a couple reasons to entice you in case you're just wondering why we would choose food forests over traditional ways of growing. For me, most of all, it's that last one on this list. It's a place for reunion with our living world. I felt so grateful today. I wasn't feeling so well, and I went and I sat in my garden, and I was looking at all these zebra butterflies that were flying around me, and the anoles. I was just in the outdoor shower and I saw a black snake slithering by, and it's just so amazing to see the living world, even in a place where I'm surrounded by the mass, fast paced society that we've created. So for me, that's one of the greatest benefits. But how I really started growing a food forest was because I wanted to have access to food and medicine right outside my back door. And for people who don't have some sort of yard space, there is the option of community lots. We've started a lot of community food forests here in my place, and I'm so grateful for them because there's a very strong condo culture here, where people don't have access to land. And so to be able to have access to food and medicine, and on days like today when I wasn't feeling so well, to I ate a watermelon that we harvested from one of the kids' gardens, and I just felt so much better after eating it. And to be able to have that is such a gift. And this provides a long-term food solution with very little upkeep. Many of the plants that we think of when we want to start growing food, we think of annuals. We think of a lot of grocery store plants. Annuals grow for 1 year, perennials grow year after year. And so food forests primarily focus on perennials. But yeah, the annuals, they take a lot of input, especially here in the tropics. They're challenging to grow, pretty much impossible in the summertime. So a lot of times people refer to our growing season as the winter time, which we're now moving out of. We're just moving into the rainy season. This morning when I woke up, it was raining hard, and we haven't had that in a while. It's really starting to feel that transitional change into those warm, humid, immense times of growth in our place, where the system is just so alive. But yeah, it provides a long-term food solution with little upkeep, where we don't have to constantly be tending to things, worrying about bugs, shouldn't call them bugs, insects, worrying about pests, worrying about what's going on. Instead, we can just create this system and allow biodiversity to play itself out. Felt so happy today seeing a couple ladybugs too, taking care of things. So yeah, it's the least amount of energy for the greatest amount of yield. That's a permaculture slogan you'll hear a lot. We're maximizing space through stacking. So even in my small urban front yard, I mentioned I have that count is just miraculous. It keeps going up each year. Wildlife habitat and biodiversity, I keep hyping that up. Resilience and regeneration of our systems, which we all, I hope a lot of you are feeling, that you want to figure out some sort of way how to participate in that regeneration of flourishing life on our planet. I think a lot of us feel confused as to how we can do that, but one of the best things we can do, in my opinion, is just start growing right outside our door, wherever we are. I think of a boss who I had who would always say, just grow food everywhere, no matter where you are, just grow it. Some plants you can obtain a yield from in a couple months. Others take longer, but there's also that indigenous saying of plant for the next 7 generations as well too. I see you guys writing in the chat, so I'm gonna pause for a moment and see what we got. I like to attract birds and butterflies and grow some edible herbs and flowers. That's great, Nancy. I'm curious about how we can bring food forests to the urban areas, particularly underserved communities. Yes, Bridget, that's great. Bridget, where are you writing in from? I'm going to go back to the chat, but we can definitely talk about that at the end if you'd like. We've started a lot of great community food forests. So let me get back to screen sharing just one moment. Sometimes I forget to take a breath on these, so it's good for me to take a moment. Okay. So elements of a food forest garden. And don't worry, these are the only slides with boring just words like this. Now we're gonna just tap in the words out real quick in the beginning. So what makes up a food forest? Elements of a food forest. Mainly perennial plants. We mentioned that word before. So perennial plants are plants that come back year after year, or here in the tropics, they're plants that just stick around. So can you guys see me, or is it just the screen share? I can't see anybody's screen right now, but can you see me? I'll look at the chat right now. Can you see?
Yeah, we see you as well.
Oh, great. Somebody chiming in.
Good.
Thank you so much. Okay, great. You know what? You'd think I'd be better at this, especially because I'm a millennial and this is like our 7th or 8th one of these, but sometimes I just don't know. So thank you. So this would be a perennial plant. So some great plants that we have here in the tropics are our tropical spinaches. This is longevity spinach, really easy to grow from cuttings. So I was just out in the yard and I cut off this plant so I could show it all to you. But what we do to propagate these perennial plants is I'm ripping off these lower leaves, and you can see there's this little tiny leaf coming out as well too. So these points right here are points where leaves come out, but they're also energy concentrated points where roots can come out as well. So an amazing thing about our place is that we're able to take plants like this. You can do this in many places, like the elderberry that I have outside my door that's blooming right now. I propagated from a cutting in a more temperate climate when I was in New Orleans. So it's figuring out those plants that want to grow in your place and using these skills of just building the system for no money at all. So what we want to do is remove those upper leaves because it takes a lot of energy for a plant to maintain those leaves. So some plants you can take off pretty much all of the leaves, but I'm going to leave just a little bit at the top here. If you can see that, I'll take off this one too. And then we'll take it home with us, and you can bring it out into your nursery. At the end of this slideshow, we'll have a picture of my nursery, and we'll talk a little bit about how to get a nursery started. But what you're going to do when you get home is make a fresh cut just beneath one of these little points. So you'll cut just below it, and then stick it in a pot with some soil and see what happens. A great way about growing in this way is that it's very low stakes. Rather than going to one of the big box stores and spending a lot of money to purchase a plant, we can save seeds, we can take cuttings, we can build the system in that way too. So I only covered the first bullet, mainly perennial plants. Stacking functions that mirror natural patterns. So we already pretty much said that. We're simulating the conditions of a forest environment to grow food. We have support species present as well too. So we're going to talk a little bit about those. I got Tithonia diversifolia here and a little pigeon pea. We'll talk about those in a minute. Self-renewing soils filled with fungi, microbes, and well-developed soil life. Think about my boss at the Urban Farming Institute. That's one of our community gardens. I think your name was Bridget. Yes, Bridget. So that is a great one that we have here in Fort Lauderdale. And he says, we don't feed the plants, we feed the soil. And he pauses in between that. But it's true. We got to focus on that soil and we got to build soil life. So to get started in our next slide, we're going to talk about how we do that. Plant communities and healthy guilds and stable, diverse ecosystems with beneficial connections throughout. So we don't have to worry too much about everything being beneficial, but we are trying to create a system that invites in life. A lot of times when we approach situations, I find that one of the permaculture principles is integrate rather than segregate. So a lot of times we're like, I got to keep this stuff out to get my garden started. But the mentality I hope to inspire in you tonight is to kind of shift it around a little bit and say, how can I use the gifts that I have around me to create a stronger system? How can I integrate that life? How can I integrate that live oak tree overhead to build the strongest system possible? All right. So I've mentioned a little bit on the permaculture principles. So for those of you who have never heard the word permaculture before, permaculture is a whole systems design philosophy intended to work with the living world rather than against it. And it's very regenerative. It's very much this hand gesture. So this was one of the sites that I worked on the Big Island. Here's the 12 permaculture principles. And a lot of what permaculture is based around is this food forest model. So I just thought I would touch on that a little bit. We have a previous course online, one of these live streams that we go into the permaculture principles if you'd like to see that on Heal the Planet's YouTube page. So where to begin? I think of that Zen saying, we begin by beginning too. So we just get started. A lot of times we think too much about things. I know I do. I'm always like, man, I got to plan this out. I'm always trying to plan things out. But we begin by simply beginning and just giving it a shot. And the stakes are much lower when we use local biomass. So local biomass is free stuff around us. Biomass is an accumulation of plant matter. So for me here in the urban environment, my tropical urban environment, we have a lot of mulch. So what you're seeing on the left-hand side is the mulch queen. She's who I did my permaculture design certification with. Her name was Corrine Brennan. And when I showed up for my PDC, I was like, what is this place? And why is there so much mulch? It was dusk and it just looked like I was on a mulch mountain. And I was like, this is so strange because I didn't really understand the benefits of mulch. By the end of the course, I was hailing the praises of mulch. So on the right, that's my first mulch mountain here in my little urban lot. As you can see all around, it was grass before. You can see a couple of papayas getting started along the edge there. But that was my first mulch drop, and I had it dropped off for free by local tree trimmers. So a great way to get started and how we start all of our food forests here in my community is with a good clean loads of hardwood mulch. So I grew up to the sound of leaf blowers, weed whackers. I'm sure you probably did too if you grew up in an urban environment. So, and I'm sure you hear them too. Every Thursday, which is today, I hear my neighbor's lawn crew come through. But these land care crews, they are accumulating a lot of biomass. And so, especially tree trimmers, when they come and do big jobs and they send it through the chipper, if we think about it, that's the forest floor. It's perfectly broken down matter that would take a really long time to happen in a forest system. So we can harness that energy to get things started. Here in my urban environment, we have very depleted soils, especially in the tropics where there isn't some sort of resting period like in temperate regions. So rather than tilling the ground, rather than putting in all that back, I mean, it's challenging. We put the most energy in to get the system started to move that mulch. But once that mulch is in place, magic starts happening because it invites in a place for microbes and life to inhabit and for um, soil life to begin. So, yes, this is where we begin. Begin by beginning and then by spreading mulch. I'm going to keep going, and if you guys have any questions, we'll take a question break in a minute. Oh my gosh, it's already 6:30. Let's keep going. I hope you guys are having fun. That's the most important thing. Okay, so there's my front yard. I always love doing these slideshows because I get to see progress, of what had happened. So this was when I first moved in. You can see this was all grass before, and then I spread some mulch. And I mentioned that moringa tree that I can see right now that is easily 25 to 30 feet right out front. And you can see it as a little shrimpy thing, the skinny one right there. Planted a banana. There's some Mexican sunflower, which is what we got right here. So yeah, just to get it started, spread that mulch, start planting, getting some plants in the ground. A great thing, I don't want to go off too far because I just realized it's 6:30, but a really useful tool as well is the Farmer's Almanac moon cycle planting. It sounds a little out there, but it really makes sense. And a lot of the growers who I've worked with follow this model of growing where, anyways, long story short, you don't have to go too into detail, but when the moon is waxing towards full, that's a great time to plant above ground crops. So last weekend, the moon was waxing towards full. So I planted a lot of my summer perennial plants. I removed my fun annual winter plants, and I put in some new above ground plants. Then when the moon is waning, when the moon is going towards that new moon, we conserve that energy by planting below ground crops. So that's just a little useful tip, but don't worry too much about it. Most of all, just start planting. Don't think too much about it. I came across some notes from a talk that I was at with Richie, you were there too, the survival gardener talk we went to a couple months ago. And I really liked what he said, where he was like, a forest doesn't think too much about it. It just shoots out like a tree, just sends out all of those seeds, and it just hopes for the best. And we're always like, oh, I got to think of the perfect place to put this plant. But you learn along the way too. And so compassion is very important in this process of getting started growing, because we can tell ourselves that we've made mistakes, or we can learn from each experience, and sometimes we'll transplant things. Like you can see that Mexican sunflower, so you see the banana, and then that plant in front of the banana, that is a Mexican sunflower, which I then transplanted because it got too big. I thought it would be good design to plant it in the center of the food forest because it's a mineral accumulator, but it just was too big. So I planted it along the edge, and that is where it lives right now. And I can see a bunch of little sunflowers blooming right now. And it's nice, it's created like a little tunnel along the side, but I just simply transplanted it. It wasn't a big deal. Okay, so we want to keep building fertility too. We want to maintain that foundation when we're getting started creating the system. So we have our open lot, we have our front yard. We're going to spread our biomass. We're going to spread our mulch on the ground. But that mulch is just a lot of carbon matter, essentially. So to build fertility, we want to incorporate plants like the Mexican sunflower and the pigeon pea, these support species. And we also want to do things like composting. So I'd love to hear in the chat if you are already composting. Feel free to write that in there. It gets me really happy to see others who are composting. It's a very simple thing to do, but a lot of times we complicate it. We think that it's going to be gross, it's going to attract flies, it's going to smell bad. We have a whole class and a whole series on Heal the Planet's website of me in my compost pile, and me by my banana circle, just telling you all these different ways, just in these short little 5-minute videos, to demystify composting, make it really easy. And this is a great way to start connecting with the living world, creating this relationship of reciprocity, and realizing that waste is really just a resource out of place. And we can harness that energy that we already have on our site to create a stronger system without spending any money at all, and by keeping things out of the landfill. That mulch that we're getting from the local tree trimmers, that would have ended up at the landfill. Those eggshells you can see right there, that could have ended up at the landfill. But instead, we're using it to build life, and we're realizing that it is really useful and it's nothing to throw away. There is no away. We're just mixing it with our inorganic matter and creating a big mess. So if we could just separate it and make it easy, then that's a great way to start building a stronger system. So we want to focus on plants that grow well in our place. So I know some of my dear friends are joining me tonight from our place here, Zone 10B, Fort Lauderdale. But I also know we got Nancy in Ontario, and I would love to hear what John and Chin, where everybody else is from. Miriam, I see you joining us, Bridget. Um, so we're all located in different places, and a good way to get a better understanding of the plants in your place is by figuring out what your hardiness zone is. So you can do a quick Google search, Fort Lauderdale hardiness zone. And it's very interesting, with climate change, we're pushing these different zones now. I consider us to be in the tropics. We're growing breadfruit at the heart of one of our food forests, which is a very tropical plant, but traditionally we're classified as subtropical. But this is a good way to get a better understanding of what's going to grow well. So figuring out what plants grow well in your place is a way to get started with our plants. So we're now moving out of the soil. No, we're not. We still got to talk about the soil with support species. But that's a really important way to be successful as a grower and create a strong food forest system. So a lot of times when we think of growing, we think of what we see on the left here. We think of those racks of bananas. We think of papaya and avocado, and I see chocolate pudding fruit out front, loofah. We think of things that we can eat. We're like, man, I can't wait to start a garden. I'm going to plant tomatoes. I'm going to plant all this stuff. And then we forget about our support species. So who's heard this term before of support species? I'm going to pause for a moment, see what's going on in the chat. Take a breath. I'm composting, but I do have chunks of food instead of soil. I do worry about pests. I'm in 4B. So Nancy, I love that you're composting. So I'm wondering if you're using a blend of your chunks of food as well as some sort of brown matter. So we don't have time to go too deep into the composting cycle, but a lot of times that's where people struggle. So when we think of composting, we think of just putting our food scraps outside, which we can do. That guy who was talking about the seeds just being flung by the tree. So newspaper's a great one, but if you since you're starting your system, another great one too would be mulch, whatever dead stuff you have around you. If you have a grass lawn, you can use your brown grass clippings. But every time you make a deposit of your food scraps, you want to cover it up with a layer of your brown matter, whatever it is. If we look at these ratios online for composting, it's really way more brown matter than our green matter, which is our food scraps. But watch our composting series because it will make things so easy. So on healtheplanet.com, look up our, what's it called? It's called Let the Composting Begin. Our executive director thought of that, I think. So look on our website for that, and it'll have some more details on it. We have a whole class on the YouTube page too. Never heard of support species. Can't wait to tell you about them. 8A, 9B, Portland, Oregon. Great, Bridget. Newspaper. What about weeds? Weeds are great. In our last food forest class, we're going to talk a lot about weeds. So, support species. So, I left you on that cliffhanger. What is a support species? So, support species do exactly that. They support the system. So, I got two support species right next to me. So this beautiful yellow sunflower you can see in the photo on the right and here in my little chat box is called Tithonia diversifolia, or Mexican sunflower. And these plants are known as mineral accumulators. So they're these really special plants, like I'm looking outside another one right now, comfrey. that have these deep tap roots that are able to pull up minerals from the ground and then hold that fertility in their leaves to feed other plants. So they're essentially a living fertilizer. So Mexican sunflower, if we buy fertilizer at the store, it's usually a blend of NPK, nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. And so Mexican sunflower provides phosphorus. It's really good at harvesting phosphorus from the soil. So we can rip off these leaves. They come off very easily. We just kind of go like this. And then we can put this around our fruit trees, around any sort of plant that needs a little bit more love. And we can bring this flower inside and smell it because it kind of smells like chocolate. So then what about those other letters? N, nitrogen. So this is pigeon pea. So nitrogen fixing plants make up a strong percentage of the food forest system. Ideally, we have about 30% of our canopy trees nitrogen fixers and 70% of our ground cover as nitrogen fixing ground covers. Gotta be honest with you, don't have those ratios in my food forest, but I do have some support species going on. And this is a great one here in my place. So if you want to learn about support species in your place, look up your hardiness zone and then write permaculture support species 4B. I think that was one of the ones that was mentioned, or 10B. And you'll get a great list of resources of plants that can help support the system. So these nitrogen fixing plants, what they do is essentially plant magic, where they take nitrogen, which is a molecule in the air, and then they store it in their root nodes with this symbiotic relationship with a bacteria called rhizobium, which slowly feeds the system, slowly feeds it. Most soil is deficient in nitrogen, which is why in big agriculture, we're making it rain nitrogen, and that nitrogen runs off into our waterways. Here in this coastal community that I live in, my mom just the other day sent us another article on the red tide, the toxic algae bloom that's happening, and it was talking about why it's a mystery that it's happening. But a lot of much of the fertilizer and herbicides that we put into the ground run off into our waterways. So if we can have these plants that do the job of these synthetic fertilizers, and we can eat them. If you've been to a Caribbean restaurant and had peas and rice, inside of one of these little peas are pigeon peas, gungo peas, my friends in the islands call them. And we can store these. We can plant them next season, and we can also eat them. I think of my boss on the Big Island who said, you're not growing food unless you're growing proteins, fats, and starches, and pigeon pea provides protein. So it's substantial nutrition as well, too, as well as being a living plant food, which is pretty cool. So yeah, support species, gotta have them. Not just our fruit trees. Okay, so guilds and plant communities. So this is a great place to begin if we feel one of the permaculture principles is small, slow, and simple. So we're like, where do I begin? How do I start a forest? That seems like a lot of work and also feels a little bit overwhelming. So a great way we can get started is with just a mini food forest, which we call a guild or a plant community. So a guild is usually centered around some sort of fruit tree or support species. Looks like in this picture, maybe an orange tree, maybe a peach tree. I'm so excited that it's peach season in Florida because I love peaches so much. Something at the center, our canopy tree. So another permaculture principle is we're designing from pattern to detail. So what that means is our overarching pattern of big tree down to the tiny details down below. So to get started, we're like, man, I love peaches so much. I want to grow peaches. I can't grow peaches actually where I am here in the subtropics. You can, but I got to go a little bit farther north. But let's use the example of peaches, or it's mango season here. So I want to grow mangoes. So at the center of my guild is a mango tree, and then around that guild are all sorts of different plants that do different things. So you've learned some of these words now. We see a nitrogen fixer dynamic accumulator you learned as well too. Those plants that pull the minerals up from the ground. Some sort of pest deterrent, so maybe like a pungent plant. Pests don't really like lemon scented plants, very pungent herbs and things like that. Mulch, ground cover, pollinator insect to attract those pollinators to come. Um, I think I like the next one on here. It says a human attractant too. So that was me in the outdoor shower. I got some Suriname cherries fruiting right now. So something that's going to draw humans towards the guild too. Guilds are not, you don't have to stick to some sort of script on them, just creative with them. They're just a way to get started. You know, you can create a couple of different guilds in different places. And before you know it, the guilds are kind of blending together into this forest system. So here's another idea. Here's a nice little guild just to get your wheels turning. And this is me on my roof the other day. So this is the view that I'm actually looking out on. If you looked at the bottom of this, that's my front door along that south edge. But then I got a little guild outside my front door. Um, and it actually got a haircut the other day. You can see that big lemongrass I cut back. But at the center of the guild, on the left, is a black sapote, a chocolate pudding fruit. Then there's comfrey along that left edge, left bottom edge. Got some marigolds as a pest deterrent, but also because I love them. I love to garnish my meals with them. Lemon balm right outside my front door, and lemongrass, which could also be a pest deterrent, but also are calming nervines for the nervous system, great to make tea with. I see cranberry hibiscus. I see ternera, which is that beautiful yellow flower. Plecranthus barbatus, that toilet paper plant, in case you need to pee in the garden. Butterfly pea is a nitrogen fixer climbing up the trellis. And this was a couple weeks ago, so I still had my mustard greens along that edge. And they were going to flower, which is that beautiful yellow flower on the right, which the bees just loved so much. And I loved to see them on it too. And I got to eat mustard greens for all of winter, which is fun. Okay, so say we don't just want to grow in the food forest way, even though we're in a creating a food forest Zoom right now. We also want to design with the patterns in our space. So when I first moved in, I did a little, sorry, one second. I think I just made this smaller. All right, back in business. So I wanted to grow some annuals, you know? We don't have to just grow perennial plants. We want to grow what we want to grow. So you can see in this picture, I was growing kale. I think I thought this was broccoli at first. A lot of those cruciferous plants, you're like, oh, this is broccoli. And then you're like, no, it's cabbage because it's hard to tell. I have some arugula in there, eggplant, looks like basil. But I realized that this western side of my yard got the most sunlight throughout the day. So to grow a lot of annual grocery store plants that we are used to, they require a lot of sunlight. Um, so I decided to not create a food forest on that side. Instead, I decided to keep things open and create a keyhole bed, a couple keyhole beds along the edge. Now they've evolved into food forest system. I have a lot of papayas over there, and I still get good sunlight. Like I said, I still have one bed over there. Um, but yeah, feel free to design in these beds as well too, and be creative with your beds. If you watch our soil class on YouTube, you'll see how to create these garden beds for free, these keyhole beds, and why would we use that shape too, and what resources we will put in for free to create these garden beds. But we're designing with those patterns too as best as we can. So great days to observe sunlight patterns on your home, because two of the most important things, if you watch our design class as well too, I keep feeding you back to all these talks that we've had. But yeah, if you when you start designing, you really want to look towards sunlight patterns. You don't want to get too bogged down with it all. But we're actually moving towards the summer solstice now, which will be on June 21st, which is a great day for mapping sunlight patterns. So the sun is at its northernmost point in the sky on solstice day, um, and on summer solstice day, and then on the winter solstice, it's at its southernmost point in the sky. And so you can have an idea, a pretty good idea of where the sun will be cast. Um, so what I did is around that date, you don't have to worry too much about it. Call off work on June 21st. But just that weekend or whenever it works best for you, whenever you're at home for the day, you can just go out every hour and take photos of your property, your lot, wherever you are. Or you can keep a journal as well too. And that will give you a better understanding of what you got going on. Those are my first tomatoes that I grew in the keyhole bed. Tomatoes require a lot of sunlight. And I like this photo too because you can see that morning sunlight is just starting to creep over. It's hitting the orange tree. And then it just gets blasted by that afternoon light for the rest of the day in the west. There's another interesting bed shape. This was my boss's. He created a spiral garden here, so you can see some taro planted at the bottom that likes to absorb that water, and you're kind of creating different microclimates with this. You'll learn more about this in the soil class if you'd like to dive into that. So creating your nursery. So something I really want to inspire you all to get started with is propagating from friends' plants, from community gardens, connecting with your neighbors, and building a living library through that. So you can see here on the right in that little pot, it looks like I just snapped off a plumeria branch. All the plumeria are blooming right now, and stuck it in a pot. So this is a great way to connect with people and connect and learn the plants that grow well in your place, because you can go for walks and see what's already growing well in your neighborhood. And it gives us a better understanding of what's going to do well. And it also keeps the budget down too. So we aren't spending so much money, so it's not so high stakes. If there are specific plants that you want to buy more mature, of course, tap on resources that you have around you, local growers. I love the Rare Fruit and Vegetable Council. And a lot of those plants that I planted were from a local group called Little River Cooperative, who do some great work in our community and propagate a lot of plants that grow well in our place. But most of the system that I have out front, like the moringa tree that I see right now, was planted from a little seed in my seed bank to my right. I should pull out my little seed bank. So what we want to do, seed saving is our next slide. But this one I just did. No, I didn't pull that one over, but here's some Mexican sunflower seed heads. So that yellow flower I've been showing you, when they dry out, I can save those seeds in a little jar. I got my mustard green seeds that you saw earlier, the tiniest seeds in the whole world. Some okra seeds. We always want to label our seeds as well too. So this says Burgundy okra from the Monarch Food Forest in summer of 2020. But ideally we're keeping our seeds as dry as possible. So that's a really important part of seed saving. But mainly what we're doing in the nursery is not so much seed saving as it is sticking seeds into soil, sticking cuttings into soil. So I go over to my friend's house. I have my friend coming over in a couple days to come harvest some of this spinach that I showed you all earlier. And I had a friend, my friend James, he came over to my house, he brought a little thing like this, and now I'm sharing it with my friends, which is so wonderful. But what we do is we figure out, we say, oh, that's an interesting plant. I wonder if I can grow it from cuttings. Take a couple cuttings of it, bring it back to your little nursery, and stick it in the soil. So my nursery is set up on the east side of my home, so it doesn't get too much sunlight. Young plants that are just getting started, they don't want to get that western afternoon sunlight like our annuals do. Instead, they want to take it easy. They want that dappled morning light. So pick a spot that doesn't get too much sunlight. This is my east side of my home, so the sun rises in the east, gives it a little bit of sunlight, and then in the afternoon it's nice and shaded. But yeah, just starting a little place. You can get pots for free from pretty much anyone who's a grower, probably has a lot of pots to give you. You can go to local garden centers where they'll give that stuff away. And then you're starting your compost pile and creating your own little garden soil that you can put in those pots. If you feel like you want to buy garden soil too, just to get started right off the bat too, just choosing a nice nutrient dense blend, that's totally okay. You know, we're just getting started and we're trying to keep the stakes as low as possible by sticking those cuttings in the ground. What do I see in this picture? I see papaya. Looks like some sort of ubi yam, sweet potatoes there in the back. Yeah, and then on the left, that was that nursery on the Big Island. Whoa, that's a crazy looking seed. So this is my little seed box that lives inside of my fridge. But for the most part, I just have this little chest to my right where I keep things like Granddad's butternut squash, which was, my granddad passed away 10 years ago, but mysteriously this butternut squash just started growing under this key lime tree that he planted long ago, and we ate the butternut squash a couple days ago, and I saved some of the seeds. Just want them to dry out. So what we want to do for saving seeds is, I mentioned I was eating watermelon earlier, and I've actually got the watermelon seeds in my sink. Anyways, they look just like these. What we want to do is we want to put them just on a little plate and let them dry out. Before, if we put the wet watermelon seeds or the wet butternut squash seeds into here, they'll start to get all moldy. So we're looking for it to be completely dry. You can keep it outside. You can put it in the sun for a couple of days. I just keep mine above my stove right there and wait till they're like, you can hear that they're nice and dry, and then put them in a little jar, label them, you have them for next year. But some seeds don't last so long. So that alien baby looking seed is the seed of a mamey, which is a tropical fruit that kind of tastes like a sweet potato, looks like a football. So we want to plant that seed right away. So a lot of times people will ask, well, how I know what I know, and it's learning one seed at a time, one plant at a time. So I should have said this at the beginning of our call, but I'm going to present a lot of information. I've presented a lot of information to you tonight, but don't try and remember it all. If pigeon pea is the plant that's meant to stick with you, it will stick with you. If it's getting a little excited about composting and starting from there, then that's perfect. You don't have to do it all at once. Instead, take it one plant at a time, and from there, that's how the food forest really evolves. So take your time with it. Propagation from cuttings and food scrap. Propagation from cuttings and food scrap gardening. So we have Richie on the call tonight, who is actually the pineapple king. So I feel a little out of place right now, even speaking about pineapples. Maybe Richie will chime in a minute if he's listening right now. But a great way to propagate is also from food scraps. So I think one of the first things I ever propagated when I was in school, I remember we grew watermelon seeds. Richie gave us a thumbs up. Not watermelon seeds, avocado seeds. So maybe you've done some of this stuff before. Maybe you did it during the heat of the pandemic. My aunt, she never grew anything in her whole life. I live next door to my aunt, and she is now growing her first green peppers because she saw some article online that was like, you can just grow a green pepper from the seeds inside of a green pepper. And I was like, yeah. So now she's doing it, and she has a little green pepper on the plant, and she loves it. So, what plant is it that you're interested in? And is it a plant that you already have around you? Like maybe you eat a lot of pineapple. Even if you're in a cooler place, all of my pineapples grow. Well, I have some pineapples in the ground now, but you can see those pineapples in a pot there. Pineapples are in the bromeliad family, so they like to be kind of pressed up against one another. They don't need too much space. So to grow a pineapple, all we're going to do is, you know what, I'm going to pass it off to Richie for a moment. That'll be fun. Let me see if I can unmute you, Richie.
I think I just did.
You did. I'm going to pin your video too. There you go. You want to put your video on?
I'm trying.
So,
Oh,
so Richie is a friend of mine who,
here we are.
there he is. So
Hey,
he was
everybody.
so he was a student of mine in the past at regenerative gardening in the tropics. And Richie has how many pineapples growing in his backyard?
We're gonna harvest over 200 pineapples this year.
Wow. So when does pineapple harvesting time start?
The next couple of months, probably around July.
So if someone wanted to start growing a pineapple, what would they do?
You can start with the top off a store-bought pineapple. And basically you buy a store-bought pineapple and just twist the top off and put it in the ground, just like the cuttings you're talking about. It's as easy as that. The hardest part is waiting for the plant to mature to produce, which takes up to 24 months.
Wow. But Richie will tell you, and I will tell you firsthand, that those pineapples are worth the wait. They taste so different. You know, when you start growing food at home, it's just such an amazing difference from the pineapples that you eat at the grocery store. So the pineapples you receive at the grocery store are smooth cayenne pineapples, correct?
Yeah.
And Richie grows this variety he calls their Kona pineapples, right?
Sugarloaf.
Sugarloaf pineapples. And they're white on the inside, but you can just get started with a pineapple top like we saw before. So I'll go back to that. Thank you, Richie, so much. I'm gonna go back to that screen. Oh. There we go. So yeah, it's just that pineapple top like you see right here, sticking it in a pot. You can, Richie taught me to remove those little lower leaves and you'll actually see some roots at the base. And then, yeah, you'll be growing a pineapple in 24 months, like Richie said. So, and it's also a beautiful, just potted plant as well, too. So it provides some functions in the meantime, too. Okay, keeping it moving. Wow, we're coming to the end of our slideshow now. So, yeah, food forest gardening is a great way to maximize our space, minimize our input on the environment, and also have a deeper understanding of how living systems work. It's really a relief to grow food in this way because if you've tried growing food in the past and you haven't been successful, it's okay. The way that we've been growing food has really taxed our soil system, and we've depleted so much of our soils now to grow specific foods using intense amounts of external input. So, what we're trying to do with the food forest system is close the loop. We're trying to grow the plants that want to grow well in our place and um, also reconnect with the allies that we have around us who help make the job easier. You know, we don't have to keep everything at bay and do all the work ourselves. Instead, nature wants to help us and nature wants to support us. We are nature. It's crazy. If you look up the definition of nature in the dictionary, we've actually written ourselves out of the definition. It's all these things, it's plants, animals, minerals, rocks, apart from humans. And so we've somewhere along the way forgotten it, and we've really forgotten it around the way that we produce and enjoy food and medicine. What you see on the left is katuk, which is another perennial green and a swallowtail butterfly on it. And then on the right, that's African blue basil, which is a beautiful medicinal plant with a little bumblebee on it. Checking it out. This is great news that I have for you all. So I haven't even really formally announced this yet. I've shared it with a couple of friends, but I'm doing a permaculture design certification this summer. And if you're located here in Fort Lauderdale and you want to learn more about this, if you want some hands-on experience and you want to become certified in permaculture design, I got your back. So you can reach out to me after this. I'm going to write my website and stuff in the chat. Here's the contact info for, so I mentioned that I have a food forest garden tour on my website. I just launched this new website, New River Gardens. I live along the New River, and on it, if you go to the portfolio page, I believe, there is a food forest garden tour where you can walk around my food forest and have a better understanding of all that I've been talking about tonight. There's also some great food forest videos on YouTube as well too, if you want to have a better understanding and some inspiration on creating your food forest. You can follow me online on Instagram and on Facebook. I try and post educational content as much as I can that keeps me sane. As we all know, social media is a weird place. And Heal the Planet is a wonderful resource as well too that connected us all here together tonight, hailing from all different places, from Oregon, from Ontario, and from here in our city too. So I'm grateful for this ability to share with you all here online too. So if you don't already follow Heal the Planet on Instagram or Facebook, we also have a rockin' newsletter where you'd like receive that video of me teaching you how to compost and that sort of thing. And you don't get them that much either. So if you want to sign up for our newsletter too, you can do that on Heal the Planet's website. So now we got some time for questions. So who's got any questions tonight? Let's see what we got. I use weeds. John, that's great. So our last food forest class is going to be on caring for a food forest system. So the first class was designing a food forest system. This class is creating a food forest system. So in our first class, we were talking about design, we were talking about patterns, it was Earth Day, it was great. Now in this class, we're actually tangibly moving the mulch, we're planting the plants in our place, we're creating our nursery. And in our last class, a year has passed and it's time to do a little work to care for our food forest. So say some pests have moved in, say things have overgrown, say we got weeds. So we're going to talk about all that stuff in our final class, which will be on the third Thursday next month. Are there other sunflowers that are mineral fixers too? That's a good question, Nancy. I'm not sure, but I do know that sunflowers are really good at remediating toxicity in the soil. So say you are working in an urban environment where there's a lot of toxicity, you can plant sunflowers. The guild that you saw before right outside my front door, I had a lot of June sunflower planted before, and it was trampled by my sister's dog Huck, but it was a blessing because I just chopped and dropped it back and planted all this stuff on top of it. So I helped clean up that soil, grew some beautiful sunflowers. If you follow me on Instagram, you'll see that that sunflower is my little picture on there. And now it's provided us a nice clean space to grow. So I would love to learn if there are other mineral fixer sunflowers. So if you find that out, Nancy, let us know. Will pineapples survive indoors over the winter? I believe so. So what people do to grow pineapples in temperate regions is grow in the pot, let it have a gorgeous summer vacation outside, and then when it starts to get cold where you are, you can bring it inside, put it in a southern sunny facing window, and then bring it back out in the summertime. And that's when our pineapple's fruit is in the summertime. So I've got a couple right outside my window there, and We usually harvest around, earliest I would say would be late June. Richie can correct me on this, but usually we're in ripe pineapple season by like late July, early August. I had awesome sunflowers here last year. I love to hear that. So does anybody have any questions that they want to share in the chat? I know we had a question about Bridget before, but I plan to make worm bin in the very near future. That's great. Bridget, I'm composting, but I have, okay. Hi, Bridget.
Hi.
What's up?
First of all, thank you for being here. But yeah, I had a question. So I'm really excited that you have your permaculture design certification because I'm looking to get mine later this year. But one thing that I'm really, I guess, kind of stuck on is how to make things like this more accessible and have a greater impact, because a lot of like permaculture and food forests and like aquaponics and things like that, their impact, I don't know, I feel like they often have kind of a narrow impact in terms of who benefits from them. So I'm wondering if you have any insight, yeah, just on that, like how we can
You
increase
are
the
my
impact. And
kind of girl.
yeah.
You are thinking good stuff. So I would love to connect with you more on this. My concern right now is that I don't know if we're going to get turned off at 7:15, but hopefully we won't. So what I want to share with you is that yes, we can definitely make this stuff accessible to more people. If I recall correctly, you're in Oregon, so I'm sure you have some great conscious people in your space, but no matter where you are, there's going to be some resistance because this is somewhat of a new story. But how I got started in my place doing this stuff is I met Richie at the Urban Farming Institute, which is a community garden, and we started a food forest there by just receiving a grant from someone locally. You can do all this stuff for very cheap, though, if you use the resources around you. So the most important thing to start looking for is land that you can grow on. But it's challenging in the urban environment, land tenure, because developers are constantly trying to take that land and build stuff on it. They don't think gardens are important. So this might sound a little out there, but I'm going to share it anyways. Something I did when I moved back to town was just starting to manifest and pray that I would be connected with people who I could work with. And so now I work with a woman. Her name is Leanne. She runs a 4-H club here, and she is an angel. She had 3 open lots that we now have community food forests in underserved neighborhoods. And we've done it for very cheap using that method of dropping the mulch, spreading the mulch. Now the neighbors come in and they help out. And it's a great low stakes way to grow, because when we think of garden beds and things like that, they take a lot more maintenance, and the food forest system is much more self-sufficient. But the challenging thing about it is that it does look a little more wild. So there's a dance to walk where we want to be aesthetically pleasing in the urban environment, but we also want to have it be a hospitable place for life as well too. So the permaculture design certification will be great for you. I was lit up in my social permaculture day in my PDC, where I was just like, this is what I am supposed to be doing. And so I'm excited for you. And I'm sure there's a lot of great PDCs where you are. So you got this. Any other questions? Did that answer your question? Connect with me in case we get cut off at 7:15 on Instagram. If you have any of that, you can reach out to me on my website too. And you'll see some videos from the community gardens that we've started here. And we've definitely done it low budget by our pants ends and on just land that is not developed right now, you know?
Yeah, no, thank you. That definitely answered my question. I appreciate that a lot. If you'd be willing to, in the chat, maybe drop your website or your email or something, I'd love to keep in touch in the future.
Yes. Okay, does anyone else have any more questions? I hope we don't get cut off, but if we do, thank you guys for being here. My email is, I see Nancy, I see you now in your gorgeous face and your cat eyeglasses. What's up, girl? What's going on?
I heard that sometimes people use leaves in the same way as you were talking about mulch.
Yeah.
So I guess
So
I've got to try to find out how to get those things. Because you go and buy a bag of mulch, it's $5, $6, right?
don't buy mulch ever again, Nancy. You never have to buy mulch again. And that mulch is dyed as well, too. A lot of times it's like refuse, gross stuff.
Mhm.
But leaves you can definitely use. I went to school in New Orleans. My mom and my sisters live in New Orleans. And so the oak trees there, they have a lot of oak trees are dropping. People rake up the leaves, they put it into the bags, and you'll see that on the side of the road. So once you start putting your feelers out, it's true. If you
Yeah,
drive through a neighborhood, you'll see those black bags out, and all you got to do is just kind of peek in, and you're going to have a gold mine that you can just pick up and bring to your site.
right.
Um, but yeah, an easy way too is to just have it dropped off. But
Mhm.
once you start looking for this stuff, you're like, man, it's all around us.
Yeah,
So,
I'll
but
try.
definitely, leaves are
Thank you.
great. Leaves take a little bit longer to break down, and different leaves have different properties. So, one of the first sites that I started working on in Mississippi, we had a lot of oak leaves as well too. And oak leaves have tannins in them that prevent them
Okay,
from breaking down as quickly.
all
Um,
right.
but everything has different properties. And like, say I wanted to grow blueberries, I could use pine needles because they're acidic, to
Okay,
help feed those blueberries,
that's
And
good to know because I just planted some blueberries.
that's great. That's
Yeah, I
wonderful.
put some coffee grounds, which I heard are also acidic.
Yes, every morning when my partner makes coffee, he brings it outside and he puts it on different plants. So it's like perfect. It's good. It's very rich in nitrogen as well, too. I know
Okay,
someone mentioned that they were starting a worm farm as well, too. And if you really look at the um, coffee grounds, they're essentially looking like worm castings as well, too. It's like that really dense, broken down matter that's just like a nice dose to feed something. Does anybody else have any more questions this evening? Thank you guys for being here. Um, like I said, we're going to post this on YouTube. Oh, I direct messaged Richie instead of writing my chat to everyone else. There we go, newrivergardens.com. So I'd love to hear also how you guys heard about this as well too. Our executive director Noelia, she sometimes comes on the call and does a little plug for Heal the Planet, but hopefully our marketing, it seems like it's reaching you guys, and really all the Heal the Planet is trying to do is just provide you guys with resources to not necessarily heal the planet, but heal our relationship with the planet so that way we're better able to um, take care of ourselves and the world that we live on. All right, you guys, if nobody has any more questions, then it's 7:15. I hope you have a wonderful evening. I hope to see you.
I'm out.
Thanks for coming, Richie. Thanks for the celeb spot on the call. We loved it and can't wait for pineapple season. Have you harvested any yet? No, it's too early.
No.
No. When would you say we're gonna get some pineapples in?
Probably by July, I hope.
Yeah, I think July too.
I've just had a few pineapples that just flowered recently.
Whoa, that's crazy.
Yeah, this late. Yeah.
Wow. All right,
Yeah.
well, I hope to see you soon, my friend, in real life. And for all of my other friends out there, I hope that you have a wonderful evening. And I hope to see you again soon. Thank you, Marietta. It's great and very informative. I love to hear it.
Yeah. Great job, Megan. Thanks a lot.
You're the best, Richie. Good night.
Bye.
Thank you, Nancy.
Thank you.
Thank you, Millie. All right, you guys, I'm going to end the recording now and I will see you next time.
Thank you.